Good speech.
Julian Ginter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The national government is missing a huge opportunity to invest in smarter, greener infrastructure. And unfortunately, the result is going to be that households and businesses are going to be spending ever more on transport, even as the government has to raise the petrol tax, has to raise the road user charges to pay for its political priority projects, which won't actually do any good for the New Zealand economy. The previous speaker, the Associate Minister of Transport, Michael Woodhouse, mentioned that the accident rate has been reducing on our roads, and it's not that surprising. I mean, what's good is we have seen an increasing safety record on our roads for quite a long time now. I think it's been declining very steadily for the past 20 years. But what's actually happening here is that New Zealanders are driving less. And that results in fewer accidents as well. And, you know, we've got the stats right here which show that vehicle ownership is starting to decline per capita. Vehicle kilometres travelled per capita are declining. And this is part of a worldwide trend that's been documented in the United States, in Australia, in Europe, in pretty much every rich country. We reached peak vehicle use, and now people are starting to look for alternatives. But unfortunately, the government isn't investing in those alternatives. And we have this opportunity to get a win-win. We have this opportunity to invest in better transport choices, which means, you know, buses and trains, safe walking and cycling, freight and coastal shipping, rail freight and coastal shipping, and all of those modes. By investing in those, we also reduce the costs of congestion on our roads, we reduce the cost of ongoing road maintenance, and we reduce the number of accidents on the roads as well. So just because I know members in this House say a lot of things which often are not correct in the case of government members, I think it's important to back up what I'm saying with some facts and with some graphs. So I've got some graphs here showing exactly what the national government's transport spending is going to be over the next 3 years. And for every single category, whether it's road safety, new public transport infrastructure, new walking and cycling infrastructure, public transport services, local roads, local road maintenance, even maintenance and renewal of state highways, all of those amounts are very, very small. But when you come to the new state highway category, look at it just is many, many times more than spending on any other part of our transport sector. And that's a very unbalanced approach to transport. It doesn't take into account the changing trends in how people want and need to get around. And it gets worse. If you look at the government policy statement on transport funding, which goes out 10 years, you actually see this number on new state highways increasing. In 2021, when fewer people are going to be driving per capita, they're going to be spending a record amount on new state highways and no more on public transport infrastructure, no more on walking and cycling, no more even on road maintenance. And I know, Mr. Speaker, you're well aware of the challenges to local roads in some of our regions in New Zealand, where the amount of money for local roads has had to be reduced to pay for the national government's priorities, and unfortunately those priorities just don't stack up economically. So I personally am very, very concerned, because if we look at the National Infrastructure Plan, 90% of the money in the National Infrastructure Plan, the part that wasn't to the ultra-fast broadband, is all on a few of these state highways that were picked for electoral reasons by the national government. You know, when we look at NZTA's own evaluation of the economic benefits of some of these projects, they show that they're simply not going to be good for the economy. They have a low economic efficiency. The Kapiti Expressway, 0.2. That means for every dollar we spend, we lose 80 cents. We don't even break even on this project. We're just spending money on a road for the sake of it. Transmission Gully, 0.3 to 0.5. Puhoi to Wellsford, probably at best 0.8. These are multi-billion-dollar projects that will only benefit 4% or less of all of the vehicle trips in New Zealand. Does it make sense to spend 75% of your money on new transport infrastructure on 4% of the vehicle trips? The national government is not spending money on roads, and they are not spending money on productive infrastructure. They have removed all of the other funding from every other category that would give New Zealanders real choices about how to get around and reduce congestion and be good for our exporters who are looking for rail freight options. But instead of doing that, they're sticking with their promise, the promise they made in opposition before they'd looked at the numbers, and they're sticking with it for the next few years, for the next 10 years. Unless we have a change in government, New Zealand, we're not going to have real transport choices. We're not going to reduce congestion in Auckland. And just to put it in perspective, you know, I made a pie chart because it really does show exactly how unbalanced and for the benefit of the minister, I'm going to explain a pie chart to him. So the largest share of new money for transport infrastructure is going on a few new motorways. And that does nothing to give Kiwi households and businesses an opportunity to reduce transport costs. So also for the benefit of the National Party members who don't really grasp economics very well, I'd like to talk about transport costs. So the central government spends about $3 billion a year on transport infrastructure. All of that money, for the most part, comes from road user charges and petrol taxes, which they've just put up so they can pay for their transport priorities. About $1 to $1.5 billion is spent on transport by local councils, and that, of course, comes from New Zealand households' rates. So you've got local and central government spending $4 to $4.5 billion on transport. The vast majority of that is going on roads, and of course, because of the central government's fixation with a few very low-value highways, most of it's just going on a few motorways that are going to cater for about 4% of the vehicle trips. But New Zealand households and businesses are spending at least 3 times that much. Yes, that's right. They're spending over $12 billion a year on vehicles and fuel to run them. And that is a direct cost to our economy because it's all imported. So it's all contributing to our current account deficit, and it's the 3rd largest item of expenditure for your average household. So your average household is spending money on their house, on food, and then on transport. And if we were able to do the same amount of activity, if we were able to get to school, to get to work, to trade our goods, and reduce some of that money that we're spending on petrol, on imported oil, and on vehicles, that is a direct gain to the economy. And that is the smart green opportunity that the Green Party supports, and that is actually mainstream in most countries around the world. If only the National Party understood, if only they had actually traveled and lived overseas. Obviously, Minister Stephen Joyce and Minister Brownlee from small towns like they just don't understand. They just don't get it. That's the only thing that the only conclusion I can come to, because Aucklanders would like to have the opportunity to have the city rail link. Whether or not they take the train, Aucklanders know that they will benefit from having a world-class public transport system, just like every other big city in the world. The city rail link. The City Rail Link is 2.4, probably even less yet. City Rail Link would cost $2 billion, but it would revolutionize Auckland's train system. That small piece of infrastructure is actually going to more than double the capacity of our existing rail network. And that makes sense. It makes sense to use our existing infrastructure in a more intelligent way rather than to just throw money at some motorways out in the provinces that only a small number of vehicles are going to be using. So if I could just sum up by saying that the Green Party is well aware of the economic opportunities we have to use our existing infrastructure in a smarter way, and it's actually going to cost less. I've heard government members today mention that somehow they're getting to surplus. One of the things they're not counting in their surplus is the fact that they're tying us into a 25-year loan for Transmission Gully. And it's a private loan, so it's going to cost us even more than if they just went directly and borrowed the money through the government. So by doing Transmission Gully, a $1 billion project that will deliver maybe $300 to $500 million in benefits, so it's a real money loser, they're going to the private sector for finance, and that means that the overseas banks that finance it will have future New Zealanders 25 years from now paying back, and they'll be getting a rate of return of about 12 to 15% for a project that will carry less than 1% of all the vehicle trips in New Zealand. So that's the choice. You can pay for a private loan overseas for a project that isn't going to make much of a difference to reducing transport costs or reducing congestion, or you could have the City Rail Link. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Alfred Naro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to take the call on this